For more insight and analysis on the Middle East situation, we're joined by Jason Campbell, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute, live from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much, Jason, for being with us. Iran has suspended its commitments under the Islamabad MOU, accusing Washington of violating the agreement. Has diplomacy effectively collapsed, or is there still room for negotiations?
Well, I think this phase of diplomacy is if not collapsed, it's collapsing. The MOU as a singular document has been flawed from the start in the way it was worded in very broad terms, very open to interpretation from both sides. It did not list really specifics about an implementation plan or sequencing. So because it wasn't immediately followed up by more substantive strategic discussions at the outset, I think this MOU has always been doomed to fail, and we're seeing that come to fruition right now.
Mm-hmm. So the United States has now carried out strikes for the seventh consecutive night, while Iran also is continuing retaliatory attacks across the Gulf. Now, how do you assess the risk of this conflict, or are we witnessing an expansion into a wider regional war?
Well, I think fundamentally neither Washington nor Tehran are interested in going back to a more full-on state of war as we saw at the outset here. That being said, we're certainly seeing this trend in this sort of nebulous phase we're in now of neither peace nor war. We're seeing a trend towards more attacks and more violence, which of course is always going to heighten the risk that one side gets put in a position where they feel they have to escalate. And you also have a higher risk of either miscalculations or miscommunications fostering an escalation alone.
Mm-hmm. So the Strait of Hormuz has become the central flashpoint of the confrontation. Now, how critical is control of this waterway to the military and also political calculations of both Washington and Tehran?
I think control is less of an issue for the global economy than is obviously the ability to freely utilize the strait for shipping. I think for Iran now, what it has learned in being able to exercise its leverage over the strait, unfortunately, is that it sees value, strategic value, in maintaining its control over it, or at least getting some acknowledgement from the United States and the international community that it has the ability to. And I think in its strategic calculations, it wants to be able to benefit, like ideally economically, from being able to exercise this control. Mm-hmm. Now, this, of course, from the position of Washington and other international entities that rely on access to the strait, this has become a non-starter, and really is why we're in this tenuous predicament we find ourselves in now.
So the attacks are now affecting Gulf states, and commercial shipping is slowing sharply. Now, what are the broader implications for regional security and also global economy?
Yeah, I think from a regional security standpoint, unfortunately, Iran is demonstrating that it still has the capability and willingness to strike out not just at U.S. and potentially Israeli interests in the region, but also to some of the key partners that are in either economically or security-wise or in multiple ways are aligned with the U.S. and the West, which certainly over time has making them more at risk of attacks as some of their ability to respond and thwart the attacks are drawing down. And for the global economy right now, I mean, there remains an energy crisis threat here. I think we have not reached that issue yet because a number of countries, most notably China, were willing to go well into their reserves to provide a more global shock for oil. Those, again, reserves have dwindled over the last week. So if we see this resumption of attacks and the access to the strait be completely closed again, I think there are some of the economic implications that were feared a couple of months ago could come to fruition here in the coming weeks and months.
So President Trump says military pressure will continue until Iran returns to the table of negotiations, while Tehran insists it will keep retaliating and resisting external pressure. What realistic options remain for the two sides to prevent maybe further escalation?
It's really hard to see under the current situation where sort of the positive paths are. I think Washington has been trying to use this coercive diplomacy of attacks on Iran to draw them to negotiations. I think there could be more energy being spent instead of rushing to get to a table. I think the United States and Iran need to hash out what a notional agenda would be if and when talks resume. Because as I said earlier with the MOU, it was written so broadly that each side was able to choose what it prioritized and how it wanted it to be implemented without really the other's understanding. And I think right now, more detail and more work needs to be put in on what specifically these two sides will discuss and in what order, rather than just trying to rush to a table. So right now, I think we're unfortunately in this cycle where you're seeing heightened levels of attacks with really a difficult positive outcome in the near term.
Jason Campbell, thank you so much for being with us on Asia One.